we've talked a lot before about the meaning crisis and how it is just kind of devouring people alive. If you're not familiar with the term, the meaning crisis is the umbrella word for the isolation that people are feeling nowadays, the loneliness, the disconnection people are feeling. So many have lost any connection to meaning, purpose, community, that they're just suffering, and not in silence. There's a lot of acting out and a lot of violence that has been accompanying the meaning crisis. One proposed solution to this that I tend to feel is where we need to go is called the third story. That it's time for us as a species to start crafting a third story. We already have a first and a second. We'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute. But we need something new, not something old, not something that we've been doing all along, but something new, something grand, something personal, and something that will get us through to the other side. So let's discuss the third story today as we walk together down CreationsPaths. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie, and I am a Christopagan druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Christopagan druid and sous chef to the Dagda.
And today we're going to be talking about the first, second, and third stories, but primarily about the third story and how we can start crafting one for ourselves, how we don't have to wait for someone else to do it. This is going to be a process of trying to find ways to reconnect and to find both meaning and purpose in our daily lives, and how to start forging connections again in a way that actually bring us hope, purpose, and a sense of being alive. But before we get into all that, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever the app is you're listening to us on. We do 5 original Christopagan and Druid episodes Monday through Friday, and you don't want to miss a thing. We have a lot of fun stuff coming up. All right, let's just get into it now, shall we?
And you can also check out more over at fractalkinship.com.
Yes, we're putting all of this that we're talking about this week, as well as a lot more, over on fractalkinship.com, which is a new kind of maybe temporary site where we're going to be housing our real-time thoughts on this project as we develop and grow the ideas over there. So definitely check it out. We're still doing CreationsPaths.com. We're still doing wisdomscry.com. This is just another one in the ecosystem where we're really going to drill in on this series of ideas in particular, because we think that this is actually one of our best tools to getting through the meaning crisis. Okay, so when I say that we need a third story, what are the first two? Well, the first story is, I would say, the folk story, the folk tale. This is the conventional wisdom that you grew up with. These are the folk tales and the superstitions that surrounded you. This could be the faith, the religion, the mythology that you grew up in. All of this is the first story. They are rooted almost entirely in experience. They are tales that help us connect to the world, but in a very intuitive gut check level. They're powerful. They're profound. They make the world move.
I would say they really are profound, because all I have to say is don't whistle in the woods after dark.
Oh, outside at all.
Charlie's reaction right away, because that was a first story that's been handed down from generations and generations.
You don't do it. You just don't do it. You don't. Yeah. You don't do it.
Yeah.
And a lot of us have been going around and trying to reconnect to our traditional first stories. And that's not a bad thing. We can see this in the work of Rune over at Nordic Animism, who has been trying to revive and, through a very academic process, bring back the old school Nordic animism, but in a very third story kind of a way. And we'll talk about that later when we get to the third story. We can see this through the revivals of Wicca and witchcraft and druidry, and people getting involved in various fundamentalist religions around the world. Also, you can see this in some of the social clubs that have started developing around ideas of Satanism and atheism, which, how do I say this without offending both groups? Most prominent satanic groups are atheist groups that are using Satan as a symbol. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But they're using these symbolic relationships to ideas past to try to form a sense of meaning, purpose, and a way to move forward. All of that is first story, and it's powerful. These are the stories that we love, the stories that remain with us, and that we tell and retell and retell in every generation. Now, the second story, I don't like the Eurocentric nature of the way the second story is usually told, because it's like, this started in the 1500s with the scientific revolution. And no, you can actually see origins of the second story going way back. Some of the earliest references I can think of to the second story are back in Roman days, where you had skeptics, and even in the Greeks, you had skeptics and people who were trying to find a more rational scientific way of experimentally looking at the world.
No, but it's in honor of the feast day of Saint Bonaventure. It started then, right?
No, it did not. The second story is just that. It is the rational, I hate the word objective, because we are subjectively trying to find objective truth, and that is all kinds of fraught. But that's a topic for a whole day. But we are trying to convince ourselves that we have uncovered some kind of objective truth through means of reason, experimentation, and study. And this is where we get the sciences, both the hard and the soft sciences. And this has generated its own story that tends to be, in many instances, combative against the first story, and has actually pushed out, supplanted, and crushed the first story in the minds of a lot of people, where they no longer have this connection that they once had to the places that they live, to the people that they're about. They don't have community centers to go to and experience that profound experience of community. And the second story is a very, very important one. It is the one that gave us our technological progress. It is the one that has helped us cure a lot of diseases and whatnot. I am not saying that it was a bad idea, but it had a lot of mistakes in it. And it is primarily the cause of the meaning crisis.
Yeah, because if you think about it, in its growing pains, in its rebellion phase, the second story that is its rebellious phase, it went on this whole like attack against magic.
And it's not even that. It's the very simple fact that you can't measure emotions.
Yeah.
Well,
because it's in denial of the very fact that it is restricted by what it can measure.
Yeah.
And like you said, emotions, some of these other subtle energies that we know are out there. We interact with them on a daily basis all the time. And yet, because science can't measure it, like the second story goes, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, the second story gets very, very quick to not even just say that it doesn't exist, but to just ignore it altogether. That people, even humans, they talk about human relationships in terms of various chemical processes in the brain and evolutionary processes. When have you met people? People couple up for all kinds of crazy reasons that have not necessarily to do with the survival of the species. Like, for goodness sakes, the survival of the species was something that people actively took into account when they were pairing off in this world. A lot of marriages would never have happened, just never. But it can't see those more subtle things of love or kink or any of the other things that might be going through somebody's mind when they start making a relationship. So they get immediately discounted because they are not quantifiable and they're not able to be put into the data set. And this is a problem on and on and on with the second story. Is anything that it cannot quantize, anything that it cannot measure, it simply either ignores or worse, deems irrelevant. And that's really how we've gotten to the place that we're at now. All that is important is somebody's grades, that they're able to prove that they have a ability to fill in all of the bubbles on the bubble sheet just right so that they can demonstrate knowledge while never, ever being granted any of the tools to develop. And again, I am not a Luddite. I am not somebody who thinks that we should abandon science. The whole purpose of the third story, which is what we're about to talk about, is not that it is supposed to supplant the second or the first. It's supposed to try to take what we can learn from both the first and the second and weave them together into a third story that helps us to have the relationships that we need to have with the world and with each other, and a proper deep experience of life that has a scientific underpinning. No, we don't get rid of medicine, but doctors need to be taught how to deal with the emotions of their patients as well as their physical ailments. Ask anybody who's ever been diagnosed with a severe illness how compassionate their doctor was. A lot of times, none, because that's not taken into effect. It's just the data.
It's having our science and our sacred too.
Yeah.
It's having both. It's part of that third story. But how does healing, because healing through medicine and healing through prayer and healing through energy work, how does all three of those come together in a full, along with the emotional awareness and healing?
Because the problem is when you start denying that any of them are helpful, you are often attacking somebody's root identity. Look, we can have debates forever about whether this method or that method is universally helpful, sometimes helpful, or destructive in a particular arena, right? In a particular case. But if it is something that is rooted in somebody's core identity, something that makes them have a sense of wellness, even if it is not giving them an actual case of wellness, depriving them of that sense of wellness is not going to help them get well faster. Like, you can't take somebody's feelings of well-being away from them and then wonder why they deteriorate quickly. So in the process of learning how to develop the third story, one, we're operating in the realm of metamodern oscillation, where we find ourselves being able to hold two opposing ideas, or not even necessarily opposing, but different ideas in our head at the same time. Where I can say, I believe that God created the heavens and earth, and I believe that the universe started with the Big Bang. And no, that doesn't necessarily mean that I believe that a divine finger touched the universe and everything boomed into existence. It
Oops,
does.
the universe's nose.
It does for some people. And I love the image of, like, and then God booped the universe's nose and the universe came into being. Love it. Beautiful. It's not as simple as that, though it could be for some people, and it could be in some instances. The whole idea of the third story is being able to oscillate back and forth and ask yourself, how do these make me feel? Because remember, our first story is about our feelings. It's about our ethics. It's about our sense of right and wrong and being and belonging and interrelationship with each other. Our second story is about reason and the more rational, again, I hate the word objective, but objective universe that we're dealing with. And how do they interconnect? How do they interrelate with people when we start allowing ourselves that oscillation back and forth and back and forth? What will often start happening is some form of synergy will arise. We'll start seeing in between them, in this ground that we're tilling in between the two ideas, a third thing start to arise. It's got the best aspects of both. It may have the scientific rigor that we are getting from modern cosmology and what have you, but it also has those connections that dig down deep. There's a reason most kids who grew up and saw Cosmos with Carl Sagan remember that line, "We are all star stuff." Whether he realized it or not, in that beautiful one simple line, he wrote a third story. See, now the cosmos isn't just something out there. It's not just these things, these stars, billions and billions. Love the way he said that, billions and billions. Such a beautiful thing hearing the way he would say that, of miles away, right? Just forever away. It's something that's inside me. It's something that's inside you, that when I see you, I'm seeing star stuff. When I feel my own body, I'm feeling star stuff. That magical line is a third story, and it is absolutely true, and it is absolutely poetic and meaningful, and gives us this deep connection to the world around us, which is why it has persisted to this day. It is one of the new myths of the third story.
A great example I like to give of this for us, and especially on the community here, is when we say better is better. It's part of our third story, better is better. It was born out of the first story, where there were the myths, the fables. The story is always told of that, the Aesop's fable, the dog with the bone goes across the bridge and sees another dog in the water with the bone and wants that bone and drops it into the water. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. All those stories, like from the first story of more of a be complacent with what you have because you could lose everything trying to get something better, up against the second story, which in this case would be that platonic idealism of there is a perfect out there and it's attainable. And this is something that has gone forward in the second story. And we oscillated between both and came up with the third story of better is better. That we recognize that we're the dog, we get the bone in our mouth, and we're happily on our way. We recognize that is good. But we know that we could have two bones. But instead of losing our bone over the bridge because we reached too far, we're just going to continue our journey, and hopefully someone's going to get a second bone or maybe there's another bone waiting for us at the house. And that would be better than just having one bone.
And there's an interesting process when you start trying to allow yourself to have these oscillations of finding what is it that really matters to you. Why do you connect with certain things? Why is it that we as a species are out in nature and suddenly we see the sun break through the trees through a valley just right, and our breath is just pulled from our lungs? We're just dumbstruck in awe. And this is a fairly universal experience. This is a place where we can do that first story work, that mythology, that myth telling, that metaphor of why are we connected to this moment so strongly. And we can bring in any of the second story things that are relevant here. Like we know about the effect of dappled green light on us, puts us in a state of calm and peace, and actually causes us to go into kind of a recuperative, restorative state. So we know how these two things are playing on ourselves, right? This mythic connection to the abject beauty of nature and this actual scientific effect of having that dappled green light shining down on us, giving us a sense of welcome well-being. And now we can go on and tell a third story. And I'm not going to tell you a third story. I want you to be thinking about what that third story is. How would you tell that third story between the two? How is that light magical? How does that light bring life into you? How is this a way for you to connect to nature, to the world around you? And then you start seeing ways that you can do this in other places in your life. The third story is going to be something that doesn't come from above. No one is going to come to us and tell us, here's the third story for our age. That's not going to happen.
It's going to take work. It's going to take that exploration. If you can think back to previous episodes where when there were these moments we would talk about people experiencing discomfort when certain beliefs were challenged, like even in our name, Christopagan.
Yeah.
That causes a lot of conflict for some people. But the whole point of that is this is an opportunity to oscillate between your personal first stories and second stories that are putting you in conflict with this word, Christopagan.
And what's really funny, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And what's really funny about that is how, in a lot of people's minds, pagan is the first story and Christian is the second story. Because we have classified Christianity as something that's rational and objective, and paganism is something that's just myth and legend and da 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 da. And through our work in developing a vital living Christopaganism, the work that we're doing is trying to craft that third story that's not just between the Christian and the pagan world, but also trying to bring in what we actually know about our world and how our world actually is, so that we are aligning ourselves with reality to the best of our ability and to the traditions that give us hope and meaning, so that we can build and make meaning together.
And it's also why when we were putting forth what a Christopagan is and discussing it, we made sure to approach it from both first and second story elements, so we could show the science of history involved in that and how paganism as a bad thing is relatively new.
Yeah.
And also we then turned around in another episode and showed how the science of history shows how paganism, a bad thing, is actually goes all the way back to the Greeks, is a Hellenistic plot at the same time, because we wanted everyone to have this oscillation, to be able to experience and develop a better third story for what that actually is, and reconciling all these other wounds, I guess you could say, left from the first and second stories and the fragmentation that was left behind from it.
And we have a lot of attempts, if you will, and I would say accidental attempts, to create third stories that other people have turned into third stories. I think both Star Trek and Star Wars function in a lot of people's lives as third stories, especially Star Trek, which is trying to find a way to square that circle of how do our personal, spiritual, and interpersonal relationships fit into a world of science and technology and all of this ever-changing nature of the universe. How do we relate to the world beyond us and the world that we experience within? Because that's really what the first and second story is. The first story is our interior story, and the second story is the exterior story. Not a perfect match, but it's a good way to think about it. And that third story is how do we bridge that gap and bring them together again, so that we are able to have that meaning. And you see this in people that really get into these ideas to the point where people are actually making devices inspired by the tricorders. They're actually making devices inspired by the technology that exists in here. YouTube just turned on a feature that is going to be automatically translating videos so that you can watch people's videos from around the world in your own language. That's the universal translator. And we're seeing the universal translator in apps. You can get them on your phone where you talk into it. It says the words in the person's language. The person then speaks into it, and then it says it back to you in your own. Like, we are starting to develop these very science fiction technologies, and they are powerful. But that's because somebody is making it into this living third story where it's not just this thing that I watched on TV that one time, but they're finding a way to bridge that gap between, oh, here's the imaginative story, here's the technology and the science that actually exists. Oh, here's the actual device we can use to make this happen. That's one way to do this, and that's one way that we see this. But you also see this with people that are looking at the various principles that are propounded by these shows, the ethics, the way of living, the way of building community, and are applying them to their lives. It sounds grandiose when we point to something like this and say that it's mythology, but the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, was basically our collective way of dealing with the traumas of 9/11. That's what those stories are. And if you've never thought about them that way, keep that into your mind and go back and rewatch them. You don't have to watch all of them, but watch at least the first Iron Man movie and basically the introduction of each character's movie, and then go straight to Infinity War. After the first Avengers is 9/11, very clearly, not even remotely hidden in how it's coded. And all of the trauma that brings out from there, and the whole war on terror that followed. It may have not been initialized to be, that may not have been on any of the paperwork, but that is the collective trauma that we as a society have been coping with. And so, of course, it found a way to come out in our stories. This is the work that we're about, is finding those first and second stories that connect to us, and then seeking, what is that third story? What is that thing in between them that is real, intangible, and
So I was going to give everybody some homework this week. It's journaling time. Yay. So have your journal handy and ask yourself, what is your old story? The worldview, the script that you inherited. Sit down and really ponder and ask yourself that question. It is so helpful to really probe that, because it will, be so revealing for yourself. And as you explore what that worldview, what that story is for your worldview, you'll also then start questioning, where does it start to break down? Where are the conflict points with that in your life? And as you look into those conflict points, and as you see it breaking down, because a lot of times their stories have hypocrisies built in them that, is generally, a person will feel the tension of that and they'll want to attack something in their life. They don't know what. They just have this urge to attack or lash out. They get angry about this amorphous whatever, because their worldview is being challenged. That story is being challenged. So write down what your story is, write down those tension points, and then just sit and let it oscillate. Label it. Is it a myth that you inherited, or is it from a science thing that you inherited? And then oscillate around with it some, and you'll find that when you sit and play with it and allow it to be challenged in that safe space where you're journaling, a lot of times you'll find pieces on the other side. You'll start to bring unity to it. You'll start to develop a new third story that will bring harmony back into your life. And you'll also find that when you're out and about, those things that used to trigger you aren't triggering anymore, because they were triggering you in the first place because they were challenging your first or second story that you were holding way too dear. And then that new third story will allow those things not to be so challenging anymore. Plus, you'll find that you'll go about standing on more solid ground, because you've actually thought about it, you've actually considered it. And so when those challenges pop up, you're already pre-prepared to address them in a healthier way. So then when somebody goes Christopagan, you don't go, wait, Christian and witchcraft, that can't mesh, and have a complete meltdown over it. You could go, oh, wait, no, there were prayers in the Bible that are magic spells. And
there are a lot of spells in the Bible.
Just rural people, and actually the whole anti-pagans being evil is just city folk versus country folk.
Yeah.
It's a false fight in the first place.
So this is just an introduction to the idea of the third story. If you watched our episode yesterday, then you'd see how this is something that's happening in the Noosphere that we were talking about yesterday. There's a lot of things that we could have talked about in here, like how MAGA became a third story for some people that brought validation and meaning to their lives and caused a lot of havoc in the United States, and how that it is an idea that got introduced into the Noosphere that we need to find ways to mitigate and to combat. We could go into a lot of different ideas that have done that, but unfortunately, we don't have time for that today. If there's any third stories or second or first that you would like us to cover or anything else, let us know in the comments. If this is the first time you've ever heard of third stories, I'd also like to know what you thought about it. How did this connect with you? If you have heard about third stories before, how did I do explaining it? Did you hear it explained in a different way? I've heard several different teachers over the years explain this in many different ways. And I think that, at least for me and my style, this is the best way to explain how third stories work. But I would love to know in the comments. If you're listening to us on YouTube, Spotify, or CreationsPaths.com, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they don't notify us, so we won't know. But you can leave a comment there anyway, because engagement is magic. And then head over to CreationsPaths.com, click on chat, and you can leave a message there, and we will see it, and we will be able to get back to you. While you're there, if you happen to have a few dollars, you can pass our way. We offer monthly and annual memberships. You can also support us on Patreon and Ko-fi. I am CE Dorset on both, and you can support us using the Cash App hashtag CreationsPaths. Thank you to everybody who does that. We are ever so grateful. Thank you so much. You all really do help us keep the lights on, keep a roof over our head, and food on our table. If we've ever said anything that's helped you out, please share it with others. That helps us out more than you know. And as we're heading out today, I think it's only fair that we go to who I think is the patron saint of the third story, and that is, drum roll please, St. Francis of Assisi, who took everything that was going on and all of the changes that were happening in his world and found a way to craft a meaningful new story that has persisted to this day. Oh, blessed St. Francis, our beloved seraphic father, help us in all that we do to connect to nature and have the strength and the wisdom to preach to the birds when we need to preach to the birds, and to tell the wolves to leave the city when it is time for them to go. Give us the patience to endure when life gives us more than we hope for, and help us to endure when we have less than we need. In the name of all that is holy and divine, amen.
Amen.